So hello and welcome to the Center for Sustainable Businesses event on the challenges and opportunities in implementing the Marshall Plan for Middle America. I'm C.B. Bhattacharya, Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh. The center was launched in October 2019 with a competitive seed grant from the Heinz Endowment. Our purpose is to help organizations move from the why to the how of sustainability so that we maximize both business and societal value. We thank the Heinz Endowment for their support and hope it continues post-COVID-19. In the long run, we are expected to be supported by corporate sponsors, and we heartily thank the 10 sponsors who have supported us so far, and we look forward to other companies stepping up and joining the fold so that we can continue to do the kinds of events and initiatives you've seen over the past year. One of the projects the center was involved in was to create a roadmap for revitalizing Middle America and transitioning it to a green economy. This particular work, titled The Marshall Plan for Middle America Roadmap, was with the collaboration of multiple partners, including the City of Pittsburgh, and the center's effort was kindly funded by the NL Foundation, to whom we owe a big vote of thanks. One of the findings of the roadmap is that we need $60 billion over 10 years and a host of multi-stakeholder partnerships among businesses, policymakers, academics, community members, and many others to create 400,000 jobs and revitalize Middle America. Armed with optimism that President Biden's infrastructure bill will soon be readily accepted in some shape or form, after all, we heard last night, what's stopping us from building wind turbines in Pittsburgh rather than in Beijing? Today, we are gathered to discuss the key challenges and opportunities in implementing such a large and complex project. We have gathered a great group of speakers, and without any further ado, let's get on with the show. All the speaker bios are linked to their names on the agenda, so we won't have any lengthy introductions and we'll get right to it. So Grant, you have to tell me the order. Is the mayor here, or shall we go with the first panel?
Why don't we go with the first panel? Look at that on cue.
He will live 1,000 years.
I threw up the bat signal, and he called to the rose to the call.
I actually was on for most of your introduction, CB, just sitting there and listening and thinking back over conversations over the past few years. And
thank you, Mayor. Thank you, and thank you for coming. So first up, we have someone who's passionate about this project and who's actually pulled us in the center into it, along with Professor Sachs. So without further ado, it's our very own Mayor Peduto. Mayor, you have 10 minutes. Take it away.
Thank you, my friend. And thank you for the incredible work that you have done, that your team has done, and the collaboration that you've built. You know, we have a rule in Pittsburgh and we've had to go through crises in order to understand that rule. And it's whenever we find ourselves in a crisis, the only way that we're able to get out of it is by working together. It is not by dividing ourselves as Pittsburghers, but by pulling all of us together in order to be able to recognize that problem. Now, in the past, we didn't prepare to fail. We failed to prepare. And as early or as late as the 1980s and the 1990s, we lived through that. We saw what happens in the devastation when an industry is destroyed. And as environmentalists and others around this region, we understood that some of the plans coming out of Washington were not looking at those that would be most impacted by the change from fossil fuel to renewable fuel. And we realized as mayors throughout Northern Appalachia that we had to have a plan in place that valued economic justice and social justice as much as environmental justice. So with the partnership of the University of Pittsburgh and the center, we asked for a plan to look forward to the day that we can meet the obligations of the Paris Agreement, but do it in a way that can also reach out to the companies that have been located here for over 100 years, the communities that they help to build, most importantly, the people that work in those jobs, so that a just transition would not leave the area most affected behind, but a just transition would benefit that area. How do you take a plan that looks into the next 10 years and sees that if nothing is changed, we will lose 100,000 jobs in Northern Appalachia, 40,000 of which would be in West Virginia alone. And to change that plan to create 400,000 jobs in the same 4-state region. Imagine the transference of the technology, the industry, the manufacturing, the entire eco-cycle of economics is more doable in a place like this that built out the fossil fuel industry than starting from scratch and building it somewhere else. Wind turbines from Pittsburgh, built by American steel, built by American labor. The transference of United Mine Worker jobs into renewable energy and those that work in the oil and gas industry as well. Electric buses, not being bought from China as 96% of them are, but down in Lordstown, Ohio. The ability of creating solar panels in West Virginia and placing them on areas that have been mountaintopped where the value of the land is gone. And instead of building a petrochemical valley down the Ohio, building the hydrogen valley, empowering it first as blue hydrogen. And then as the solar fields are built, the green hydrogen valley that will power the next industrial revolution, just as it powered the last. The president spoke yesterday of this vision. It's a vision that unites environmentalists with labor unions and doesn't look to separate them. It's a vision that brings together those who have built the fossil fuel industry and those who will build the renewable energy industry. And it allows them to expand their portfolios and utilize the resources that we have here, the people, the towns, and the infrastructure. And it's a plan that invests. Instead of leaving our region behind and just considering it an externality in the move to renewable energy, it puts us front and center and says, we can do this. But in the post-industrial world, we can also benefit from it. In the past year, since this report has gone out, we have moved from climate change being a conspiracy to climate change being a job growth industry. And we have seen, as the president of the United Mine Workers stood up and said, that they'll consider this now, that they'll look at this as long as you promise one thing to our members and to their families, that they'll have a good job. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. We can do both. We need a better plan. And with the Marshall Plan for Middle America, we've created it.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for those inspiring comments. I hope you're able to stick around to hear what our academics and policymakers have to say. So moving right along, I shall introduce the first panel that we have today. And for some quick housekeeping, so my earnest request to our panelists to keep their remarks short and to the point so that we cover more ground. To the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and time permitting, we'll take 1 or 2 questions. But more importantly, we'll share the questions with the panelists so that they can directly email the response to you. You will also receive a short survey that Ash will drop into the chat at some point, and please fill that out. So our first panel will discuss the intersecting roles of business and policy in greening Middle America. We have a great group of folks, starting with Dr. Brian Anderson, Director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory and Executive Director of the Interagency Working Group. We have Professor Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor of Columbia University and Director of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We have Mr. Francesco Starace, who's the CEO and General Manager of Enel and a member of the Board of Directors of the United Nations Global Compact. And all these folks' titles actually go on to 3 lines, so I'm just giving you some abbreviated versions in the interest of time. Don't mean no disrespect to anybody. And last but not least, our wonderful moderator, Dr. Catherine Augustine, who's the director of RAND Pittsburgh. Catherine, take it away.
All right, thank you, CB. And Mayor Peduto, thank you so much for those remarks. Your vision and your optimism fill me at least with hope and provide a great segue to this panel on how we could get to work. And I hope the panelists will allow me the informality of first name usage. And when I pose the first question to you, please feel free to provide some context in terms of what you're working on now or focusing on to help us understand where you're coming from with your answers. And I want to start with the main opportunities for the region. And Brian, I will start with you. What would you say are the primary opportunities here in this region, stemming from both Biden's infrastructure plan and also his climate commitment?
Sure. Well, Catherine and organizers, thanks for putting this together and the opportunity to speak about the Department of Energy's efforts and efforts across the federal government. So as was mentioned, I'm director of the National Energy Technology Laboratory, and we have been, for the last 25 years, really the driving force for the development of technology in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We have, with project partners around the country and the world, driven down the cost of carbon capture from fossil energy power generation sources and now industrial sources to where we're sitting at around $42 to $48 per ton of capture, with a glide path toward $30 per ton of carbon capture. We view this as a really integral part of the decarbonization of not only our power sector, as the goal set forward by the Biden administration of decarbonizing the power sector by 2035 and decarbonizing the economy by 2050. And so specifically to the region, the technologies we've been working on and decarbonization, grid integration and modernization. We, in fact, at NETL, we manage a large portion of the vehicles technology portfolio within the Department of Energy as well. So everything from electrification to utilizing hydrogen is in our portfolio. So all of these technologies, when we set the targets that we have in the U.S., both with the Paris Climate Agreement and the Biden administration's goals, the opportunity for the region is to re-envision and re-leverage the resources we have, the people, the infrastructure, and provide opportunities for investment. Flipping on the other hat, as was mentioned by CB, the Interagency Working Group for Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Redevelopment was just stood up by the Biden executive order on tackling the climate crisis domestically and abroad. And this Interagency Working Group, as was announced last week, I'm the executive director. We're reaching across 11 federal agencies. And so you can imagine this is Department of Energy, Treasury, Commerce, agriculture, EPA, Appalachian Regional Commission, and our goal is to identify the opportunities across the federal government to make investments in the communities across the country that have already been affected by coal plant coal plant retirements and mine closures, and looking forward to redeveloping the economies of these communities. So it's across this entire region in the Marshall Plan, and certainly southwestern Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, how we can bring all the federal resources to bear to reinvigorate these economies. And so just as a highlight, we've identified $38 billion worth of existing authorities today across these agencies that we're trying to coordinate. And then certainly the infrastructure plan and investments in hydrogen demonstration projects, carbon capture retrofits and projects, as well as the expansion of 45Q tax credit provides a lot of opportunities for the region to invest in infrastructure, workforce development, and moving and modernizing many of the supply chains in manufacturing and the energy sector.
Great. So Jeffrey, you've now heard a lot about the region, both from Brian and from the mayor's remarks. And let's talk about opportunities going in the reverse direction. So how do local efforts like this Marshall Plan further the UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, first, let me congratulate Mayor Peduto, because the power of his vision has brought us to really the moment of implementation. It's quite remarkable. And Mayor, from the first time I heard you propound this, I said, that's it. And obviously, President Biden agrees. Every word of his speech yesterday was exactly your message. I think it's quite incredible also. For too long, we failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs, jobs, jobs. And there was Pittsburgh, as we've all noted. So that's no accident. That is a great tribute to your tremendous vision and tremendous advocacy. The message is coming through. And I think we're really going to get to where we need to go. You know, the point of this is that there is an overarching global reality and global challenge. The climate crisis is very deep, very significant, completely global and completely intergenerational. And it is no accident that last week, when President Biden assembled 40 world leaders representing 86% of the world population, about 80% of the world GDP, and about 75% of the world's greenhouse emissions or carbon emissions, they all said this is real, and most of them, and the big ones, committed to net zero by mid-century or thereabouts. China by 2060 at the latest, European Union, UK, United States, Canada, Japan, Korea, all to get to net zero by 2050. So we're on that path because as a world, we need to be on that path. But it's actually a path to a better life, not just a safer planet. And that's the point. It gives us the chance to implement new technologies that will create jobs and create cleaner air, higher quality lives, a safer environment, a secure energy system. And this, I think, is what puts the pieces together, that we need to do this. We'd have to do it anyway, but we can do it in a way which is socially inclusive, which fits with our technologies and our economic needs. And what Mayor Peduto has been pointing out is actually a three-way alliance: government, business, and academia. So I want to put the stake in for academia. Obviously, CB is hosting us at University of Pittsburgh, but the academic capacities in the Upper Appalachian region, starting with Pittsburgh, with the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon, among others, are so strong that the chance for really moving forward on advanced infrastructure, on use integrating AI, advanced digital systems, the green hydrogen that Mayor Peduto mentioned, building the advanced wind turbines, the low-cost carbon capture and storage that Brian just mentioned. All of this is a wonderful mix of advanced technologies, of the university network that our country has galore and that we should be tapping, and now a government that knows how to lead and is leading in the right direction. And I would say governments at all levels. So I am very optimistic about this, as the other speakers think we've really finally hit the tipping point on this, not only within US politics, but globally. Just a quick word, the pathway to net zero, I think, is also quite clear, although I'd love to hear Brian's expertise on this. But it does seem to me that the basis of the story is zero carbon power, largely through renewables. Also, I was happy to hear his flight path to $30 per ton of carbon capture and storage, because that makes all of this even more readily achievable. Electrification of transport, electrification of buildings, a lot of retrofitting and a lot of jobs involved in that. And then electrification of part of industry, but also a hydrogen economy and other green fuel part of our economy, largely manufactured through that zero carbon electricity. So I think we're building a clean grid, an electrified transport and building sector, and a mix of electrified and hydrogen-based industry that's going to give us a very clean future and a very competitive future. I don't want to say more in the presence of these two masters of the technology. I'm just an economist, but we have Francesco Storace, who is leading one of the world's leading companies, putting all of this into practice, in real practice and in real time with Enel's leadership, and Brian's expertise on the technology. But everything I see as an economist says this is absolutely winnable and in the right direction, and at low cost or even at negative net cost, because a lot of these new technologies are just cheaper than what we've used in the past. So we've reached grid parity on zero carbon in many areas. As the grid gets smarter and as our technologies get better, and as that learning curve that Brian mentioned continues to give us future advances, we're going to find that this was nowhere near as hard as the critics said it would be. It's going to be pretty exciting, and it's going to be a quick dash, I think. A big change in transport, a big change in power generation. We're going to make advances that were not achievable. I hope the Wall Street Journal finally wakes up and starts telling its business readership the truth, because it's been nothing but propaganda for the last 20 years, and it's really misleading American business. Because American business needs to know this is the way of the future, and if you're not with it, you lose the future. So those are my opening remarks, Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Continuing the theme of optimism, very hopeful. And Francesco, let's turn to you now and talk about the role of the private sector. So what role would you say that the clean energy industry can play in driving the inclusive growth that we've been talking about here? So not just economic, but also the social growth.
Well, thank you for having me here. And again, I'm really happy to share this panel with two big experts in their fields, and I'm really humbled by being here. And I have also to say that I was really touched by William Peduto's speech. I don't know if he is Italian or can understand the language, but we need a mayor here. And whenever you're tired of Pittsburgh, please come. Okay, I'm really. It was really inspiring. I loved every word that you said. It's amazing, and also the way you really need to you really show that you believe in what you're saying, which is a big difference in this kind of situations. That said, I think The experience we have in this kind of transitions is that, yes, Jeffrey is right. This is a transition that has positive implication from an economic standpoint. So you don't need to worry about the fact that this is a subsidy scheme once again. This is an economic driven change that is taking place quite fast in very many places and around the world. But the issue here is it always has two different patterns. In places where you don't have a legacy of an industrial base to substitute, it moves into a void and picks up speed because it creates jobs from scratch. It starts creating an industrial base that is intrinsically more sustainable than the one we have inherited from our industrial past. It has its own shortcomings and they need to be understood and dealt with, but it's relatively simple. It's much more difficult to convert a heavy industrial base to another story. And why I'm saying this is because we have experienced that in Europe. We're experiencing it in the US now. It's an experience that is basically happening in all the OECD area around the world. And it starts with telling people the truth about what's going to happen. And not hiding the fact that the existing agonizing industrial base can stand more and can somehow be saved by some unforeseen miracle. It's better to tell people what's going to happen. And in order to do that properly, I think you're absolutely right, Mayor, you need to have a plan. Because without a plan, this will only create panic or some kind of irrational behavior. So the plan is really what matters here. And the plan can only be built together between private industry with its own views of the interesting investment that can be carried out in a certain amount of time and the priorities, and the public administration that needs to govern the transition in a society, which inevitably is its own business to carry through. So to do that properly, each party needs to understand clearly what is the view of the other one and where is he coming from. And that can only be done if there is a complete, transparent, honest dialogue between what interesting investments are, what potentially technology evolution can be in not so distant future. We cannot tell people stories about something that will happen 20 years from now. Okay, nuclear fusion, for example, is not something that happens in the next 20 years. So we cannot tell people, don't worry about your jobs, there will be nuclear fusion, because they will just be frustrated. So there has to be some truth about the whole matter. Why I'm insisting on it is because this is happening in Europe right now. Okay, this dialogue is something between archaeology and science fiction, and very little about the present. So what is it that we can do now? And what is it what we have done in the past that it's no more viable? And what is that will maybe happen in a very distant future? And let's be careful, because people are interested in what can be done now, because their jobs are now and their future is next year and then the year after next, because that's where they really feel the pressure. So the experience we have is that it is best to work, of course, to do competitive CCS and everything that needs to be there by hopefully fast, but work on what can be done now. And really, we know that this transition is all about decarbonizing the electricity mix, which today is happening in the US fast. It is happening everywhere because of economics reasons and because of the convenience that it comes with it. Strengthen the networks, because without that, the system will stall its growth. And electrify society, because as electricity can be decarbonized, the use and the pervasive use of electricity in other industrial and societal stratifications will decarbonize further and faster the system. the decarbonization in itself is a value because the planets need it, but it's also convenience because electricity is a much more efficient energy medium. You can digitize it and use it more precisely. You can use it in a better way. It is obviously, if it is decarbonized, coming with zero particulates and emissions, so it increases the life conditions and the quality of life of everyone. But it takes very careful planning. So you cannot do one thing only. You cannot just put down networks if you don't have a decarbonized electricity mix. You cannot fully decarbonize the electricity mix without reinforcing networks. And the two things need to go hand in hand. And here the public and the regulators and the planners need to really understand the sequence of all this. I can tell you one thing that, when I was asked to participate to this panel, I wonder why CB was so active in Panama, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Costa Rica, because for me, Middle America is that, Central America. So I said, why are you worried about these countries? Of course, they're important, but then I realized this was about the middle of the USA, okay? And then I was much more interested because we have a big presence in the US. We have a big growth in renewable space. We have a big growth in a lot of value-added services, demand response, batteries, storage, flexibility. And we really care about what happens in this region because it's a very, very deep industrial base. It's a very, very important resource-rich part of the world in terms of renewables. So I'm absolutely delighted to be in this field. Finally, I just want to add one thing. Maybe you are not, because you are all US citizens, you are not fully aware of where you're sitting on. I mean, you have perhaps some delay in this transformation because of maybe misguided policies or whatever, but you have a super efficient market to deal with. I mean, everything can happen in a faster time than you think, provided some guidance and some clarity is given to the industrial base. This is a country that started late in the vaccination curve and outpaced everybody else. This is a country that was late in putting ventilators down and resolved the matter in months, even when the president was denying the fact. So you can do a lot of things that you cannot even think about, provided you just focus a little bit. And so I think this potential here is amazing. The industrial base that you're dealing with can be converted fast, provided that there is a plan that deals with things now and it does not confuse people with putting science fiction and things of today and the past all together. Because Americans are not stupid and they are very smart at finding out what is true and what is not. Smarter than anybody else, I would say.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's super important to keep in mind and think about. And Brian, I'd love to hear how you would take Francesco's call for there being a concrete plan that focuses on what needs to happen now and fill it in a little bit for this specific region, particularly in thinking about how do we not leave those behind who are currently in the traditional energy jobs. I think we've all heard a lot of words of hope that can happen, but what about the how? And also maybe bring in whether you think there are local or state policies that need to change to facilitate that how.
Sure. So with the interagency working group, we spent the last 60 days since the executive order doing an examination of the energy communities, traditional energy communities, coal and power plant and fossil energy communities across the country. And certainly a number of them in this region. And the first step we're going to take is to have a series of community town halls, because it's not a one-size-fits-all effort. So specifically in this particular region, some of the early steps that we're going to be taking are investments in identifying, plugging, abandoned, orphaned oil and gas wells, utilizing the existing workforce, the existing skill set that the energy energy jobs community has. Same thing with remediation of mine lands. And so those are very immediate steps that are one in the infrastructure plan, and as well as our work in the interagency working group to take the skill sets that are existing in the communities and reapply them into the transition. The second step is near-term investments in infrastructure, everything from the rural broadband, which is a big issue in this particular region in the Marshall Plan, as well as some of the supply chain supporting infrastructure, and that's road, river, and rail in the traditional infrastructure space. So immediate investments, again, with skill sets that are closely related to the transitioning energy jobs in these energy communities. And then, I think that it becomes a public-private partnership at the public scale at many different levels, local, regional, and national, so that we can tailor the pathway for each energy community across the country and the many that are in the Marshall Plan region, so that we can understand what the assets are, both from an infrastructure and technical skill set vantage point, and then tailor some of the solutions like the mayor had mentioned earlier in terms of drawing the supply chain to the further deployment of the clean energy pathways, tailor those supply chains to where we're bringing manufacturing into the regions, again, leveraging the skill sets, leveraging the existing assets of infrastructure, and creating regionally based infrastructure development plans that coordinate the transition in the very near term and out through the longer term.
Jeffrey, skill sets, that's been mentioned a couple of times. Thinking about you and your coming from a university, when you think about retraining local workforces or educating youth, how should we go about that? Is it important to focus training around specific technologies? And if so, how do we determine which ones are the right ones?
Let me say how happy I am to hear both Francesco and especially Brian just now about the very practical nitty-gritty work that is underway and how rapidly it is advancing. We had a government for 4 years that was quashing expertise, denying reality, going in the wrong direction. You wouldn't think about the government being able to do anything. People were just trying to stop from abuse from the president, unfortunately. And now we have a government that's doing what government's supposed to be doing, which is solving complex problems and getting into national scale strategy. And I just want to underscore that because we can't run our continental society without an effective federal government. We couldn't control the pandemic. There's no way, even with all the local interest in renewables, and a lot was getting done, that you could actually make a transformation at the national level effectively without a federal government that was leading. And so I just want to savor for a moment that we now have a federal government that speaks with a grown-up voice, that is goal-oriented, is serious, is putting out plans. And I want to congratulate Brian because it's just heartening to know an executive order comes and then hard practical work is getting done. And exactly the right kind, by the way, because we can facilitate a transformation by looking locally at what's there. Every region has to understand where is its energy going to come from. It's going to be clean, but is it going to be wind? Is it going to be solar? Is it going to be imported on an interstate grid? Is it going to be locally produced on PV solar rooftops or solar fields? Is it going to be carbon capture? And this really is differentiated across the country. My own view, by the way, and I'd love to hear Brian's view and Francesco's view on this also, is that I've been advocating that states, which are the utility regulators in the United States, basically take the lead mandate. We got to get to zero. And so it's a little hard state by state, but under a federal mandate, we're going to decarbonize 50% by such and such date. But the states are going to have to do a lot of the siting, the land use, and so forth. So the nitty-gritty work that Brian is talking about ultimately will come down to state regulatory agencies and mayors, and will be done locally, but under a common national standard and with a national grid that can move high quality, low carbon electrons across the country to make a more resilient and lower cost grid at the national level. And that will be on Enel's systems to an important extent as well. So I think the nitty gritty is essential. From my point of view in training, again, I'm going to emphasize I'm just an economist. So a good economist listens carefully to people who really know things and then tries to put a dollar sign in front of them in some way. But basically, we need the engineering expertise. We need the business schools to be able to put this into a business context, because this is a public-private partnership. We need the public policy schools to be able to understand that complexity of dealing of public goals and then private business. That's the US mix when it works properly. And that means a different kind of training. And what I have enjoyed at Columbia University is the university took an initiative to create an Earth Institute 20 years ago. They let me be head of it for many years. And it brought together the climate scientists, the engineers, the economists, the public sector, public administration specialists, the lawyers who were specialists in drafting regulations. It turns out that interconnected mix for a complicated issue like this is really important. I think for our students, we train general skills and to be able to be at the forefront of technology if they're engineers, but then it's in the real nitty-gritty work where you gain the ultimate last step of the expertise to be able to solve the problem. So the main thing that we need training is the basic concepts, the cross-disciplinary nature of all of this, because it is a partnership across many different stakeholder sectors, and the problem-solving abilities, the ability to use data analytically and to be able to speak across different intellectual tribes, as it were, so that we can really understand each other, what the engineers are saying they need, what the businesses are saying, what the government is mandating in a regulatory way, what the economists are costing with the different kinds of policy support, whether it's quantity regulations, tradable permits, carbon pricing, and so on. All those tools are just tools to add into the technical mix that has to come ultimately from the engineers and has to be compatible with the business model.
Great. Thank you. And Francesco, I'm going to go to you for a last and similar question. You've talked about how this work is harder if you're going into a place where there's already a strong industrial base, and the importance of having a plan that is realistic, focused on the near term, easy to communicate or easy to understand. Anything that you've observed that would help us here if you go down one more level in terms of helping fossil industry workers transition and participate fully and justly in that energy transition?
Thank you. This is a very important question, because we have constantly an example of how workers are ahead of those that are supposed to tell them what to do. I mean, when we shut down 23 power plants in Italy, which is basically half of the thermal power plants we have in the country, 13,000 megawatts. Okay, it was a big decision. And we told the people of the power plants, look, you're not going to lose your job because you're going to be moving and doing something else within the company. But this one plant where you work has no future, that it will never start up again. And most of them knew that from years, and they had a clear knowledge of what was going on. So it's not that you have to tell them things, they know it already. The question is, what next? That's really the point. And that what next need to be real, not a dream or something. You can just say, don't worry, it's okay. They worry. So the policies are important. And I think what Jeffrey just said, and also Brian, I think if you, for example, take just a small example, which by the way, the US is apparently getting into. If you say, we will ask a 20% of all the buses moving children in schools around the US to be electrified by year such and such. That is not tomorrow, but that will give a signal to the industry that all of a sudden, out of 400,000 buses, 20% need to be electrified in, say, 10 years. 80,000 buses. It's a huge number. It's a minimum. And we know, because we run electric buses in many cities in Latin America, they are in the money right now. So you don't need to really find out, to just try once. And then you say, I will electrify all the buses because it's better for me, money-wise. But that will give the signal to the industry in the US that it better start worrying that instead of importing one bus at a time from China, they better manufacture. There's enough manufacturing base for 80,000 buses. It's a huge number. And so this is a small policy. It looks kind of tiny, but it can trigger an incredible evolution in the manufacturing of this kind of buses. And then, once you start manufacturing electric buses, you understand that also you can electrify trucks. It doesn't take much for that, And then you can say whether hydrogen or electricity is best, but this is already a derivative of second order. You already have established a manufacturing base that didn't exist before. The same you could do for batteries. I mean, why only few factories are there for batteries? Batteries will be everywhere in electricity systems. Not just in our phones or home applications, but they will be everywhere in the system, all different parts of the grid, before the meter, after the meter. They will provide flexibility that renewables need. And battery technology is today an open battlefield where the US can play a big game. Again, just that, you can imagine what this can trigger. So I think few clear decisions are better than a lot of fuzzy things that can be studied. I mean, and again, I'm not saying they're wrong. I think they are the future, but people need to know that there is something right now that can give them the job they want and the future they want. And that's it. I mean, then the rest will come up.
Right.
It's super important that the policy need to be clear. And I agree with Jeffrey. This time, it seems the federal administration has taken a very, very clear route. I mean, I really applaud that the initiatives are clear. I mean, they are also pretty simple in their own nature. I mean, you need to electrify. Why do you need to put a lot of interconnection across the US? It's obvious. I mean, the system is so wide, and most of the natural resources in terms of renewable energies lie in places where people don't choose to live.
Right.
Who wants to live in a place where you have 5,000 hours of strong wind a year? No one.
Right.
But we all congregate in cities where we're happy. It's near the water. It's a nice place, and we want the energy there.
Right. We want to benefit.
But it's over there, so you have to move it around, and that is a big thing all over the world. I mean, this is incredible stuff that people don't understand. Renewables mean a lot of interconnectivity. Again, this is a great thing.
I could listen to you talk. I could listen to the three of you speak all day, but we are at the end of our time. So thank you for your words of wisdom, for your advice for us here in the region, and your general guidance.
Thank you to
Thank you
all
very
of
much.
you. And Francesco, I think we have to do the next project on Nicaragua and Panama. I mean, I think that sounds pretty interesting. I don't know how I missed out.
I'm sorry about that, but the first time I said, why are you in these countries?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for these wise words of wisdom. And we move quickly to our second panel, equally power studded. And let's start with we have Mr. Snehal Desai, who's Executive Vice President and Chief Growth Officer at Evoqua Water Technologies. We have, Ash, are we able to find Snehal? We have Idon Dion from the Vice President of the IBM Corporation, Vice President of Corporate Environmental Affairs. And we have Mark Thomas, President of the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance. Our moderator is the lovely Dr. Katrina Kelly-Pitou, who's a systems strategist at the Smith Group. And they're going to be diving deeper into a topic, again, that's very, very important, and the words we've heard last night from President Biden about competitiveness, that the United States is losing its competitive edge and we need to be back into being competitive on the world stage. So can this Appalachian region transformation actually boost not just the domestic market, but can it boost United States competitiveness kind of, on the world stage as well? It's just a thought, a direction to work in. And Catherine's gonna prompt the discussion and give us some, and our speakers will give us some insights. So, excuse me, Katrina, please take it away. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much, CB. Well, I'm excited to be here today to dive deeper into the infrastructure opportunities specific to our region. We know from the earlier discussions that we've just had that we need to make both fast and critical progress on our sustainability goals, and ones that translate into this robust local economy for all in the region. Our panel today includes a variety of speakers that both work globally and regionally at this exact intersection of technology, sustainability, and economic development. So knowing that infrastructure is arguably at the intersection of all of these avenues that we've discussed today, I'm really interested to hear how we can kind of tackle the best practices that you are all working on. So to get us started, Mark, we thought we would help, we thought we could rely on you to help us understand the lay of the land, if you will. Can you talk to us about just how competitive we are as a region when it comes to infrastructure? And just what are some of the key infrastructure gaps that we have in this region that we need to be thinking about?
Great. So first, good morning. I lead the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance. We serve as the 10-county business attraction entity for a parent organization called the Allegheny Conference. And from where I sit, we work with companies who are looking to invest here, obviously work with public and private partners on preparing sites, preparing a story really to market the region for this type of investment. And I think obviously with the big infrastructure bill that is in the works, this gives us a chance to really seed projects that not only just fix our roads and bridges and kind of traditional infrastructure, but create the right type of sites and institutions that can allow us to build what we think is the future of energy and sustainability here. And what that means is new companies, new technologies, new innovations that are working with our traditional industries, but also our emerging fields will find a home here no matter where they plug in. And I think what does give Pittsburgh a unique edge is that we are an energy capital of the world. We have great universities, we have great companies, we have a lot of just disruption that's happening already that we think the investments that are happening at the federal government will only allow us to build on top of that.
Terrific. So I'm actually going to follow up with you a little bit there because you used a critical word that I loved, which is disruptions. Francesco alluded to as well, focusing on the key technologies that are coming online, if you will. Whenever we're really thinking about things that are kind of buzzy in the worlds of sustainability, like circular economy, the hydrogen economy, what do we actually mean by energy innovation in our region, if you will, and like what should we be pushing for?
So my perspective is we should be pushing for it all. Like, I don't think we know, like we're not necessarily saying we want this versus that, right? And I think when you really get to know the Pittsburgh story, it is pretty comprehensive. And I think what we see with Houston, with Calgary, with the European hubs, pretty much the places where traditional industry has thrived, they're the places that are somewhat better.
Some bandwidth issues. Mark, you're frozen. I don't know, can you?
I just keep moving at this point.
Yeah, can you move it to the next presenter, maybe, Katrina? No, but you're.
Sure, no problem. Snehal, since we actually started talking about innovation, I think you're probably the best one to pick up this sword, if you will. So it's not only about how we're producing energy, but there's a variety of technologies that come into play when we're talking about these innovation ecosystems, if you will. What is your company working on specifically whenever we're talking about infrastructure, and how can we be thinking about this as part of our overall innovation and sustainability equation?
Sure. And first of all, thanks for the invitation to join this conversation, and glad to participate. You know, we, Evoqua Water Technologies, for those that don't know, we are really focused on the treatment of water from the municipal side, the industrial side, and really not just about it. When you think about it, it's so many different industries, so many end uses. And we like to say, you know, without water, you know, the economy doesn't really run. And while we can talk about energy, we can talk about water, they're very inextricably linked. And I would add food into that. And, you know, there was that one graphic about the connection all to climate. So, you know, the conversation around water isn't what it used to be. It used to be around a quality and a quantity. And oftentimes the quality was reasonable and maybe the quantity wasn't enough, or vice versa. But today that's become very complex. We have emerging contaminants that are showing up in our waterways. We have needs on discharge from industries that, you know, over time we did not realize it, and then we did realize and began to regulate what it is that they could discharge in the environment. And fundamentally, that has caused a need for innovation to be able to not only think about how will we deal with these emerging challenges of, say, not enough water and too much water, frankly, depending on the condition you're in, but then also on the back end of what happens when you're done using the water, whether it be for the food production, whether it be even in our municipalities, and several other industries. What do you do before you actually release that and let it on its journey? So we at Evoqua have been focused on a few topics, although these are by no means the only ones. But, you know, the circular economy in a nutshell is really how you can encapsulate a lot. So first and foremost, when you get a drop of water, you work at you make it work, right? And what I mean by that is we don't use it in temporal states anymore. We don't bring in water for power production and then carry it on its way. Why not recycle, reuse that water so that we're not extracting from the source any more than we need to be able to accomplish the goal? We're seeing incredible uptick on that on the industrial side, mostly because, first and foremost, the market signal they were given was that it is going to cost you more to get rid of that water than maybe traditionally. And once you start to provide that incentive to not release water with contamination and what have you, and start having to treat it before you release it, it's a short step from there to get to say, why don't I just reuse it? So we're seeing a really great uptick on that. The other one that we're seeing as I think about circular economy is that it is the energy side of this. So a very good example is in the food industry. There is an enormous amount of trapped energy in wastewater, whether it be at a municipal plant with the sludges that they have, or think about a dairy facility, or think about a poultry producing facility. There's an enormous amount of energy that's trapped in the waste that they're creating. And we like to think of this as waste to value. And no longer are we even thinking about things as wastewater plants, but thinking about them as energy recovery or nutrient recovery or some form of economic driver. Again, the signal was given that you need to deal with the results of your work. And then the opportunity arises for us to be able to use innovation like anaerobic digestion and being able to recover phosphates, et cetera. So, when we think about these problems, they're so linked. Our innovation really is at that intersection. And I think the other thing I'll underline this is that a strength for the region, when you think about what companies are thinking about when they decide on 20 and 30-year investments in capital infrastructure and where they place production, is a source of stable water supply, a source of, understanding that it won't change in that time frame of the asset because the return on the asset is critical. And I think we've seen this, right, through the World Economic Forum. Water risk has risen into the top 5 and has stayed there. Carbon has actually gone in and out. Climate has gone in and out. Water sticks around because it has so many other implications. So we're thinking about it in those terms. Climate solutions, we think about it as health and wellness. And then, being here in the region, digitization helps us get there more efficiently.
Well, I think you perfectly teed us up to move over to Idan. And Mark, we'll get back to you too, because we know that ironically you had broadband issues, which maybe Idan can help with before we move back to you. So Idan, we're talking about digitization as well too, and Sneha really pointed to how just digitization control of assets is so important to us. How does IBM factor into all of this? And essentially, how can you help us save our cities, if you will? No pressure. Oh, you did.
Sorry. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure and honor to be part of this panel. Digitalization, it's everywhere. And I will start by saying, and the opportunity is really endless. I don't know if I could say, but there are many companies who are in our industry, and we certainly are prepared. Technology is here really to be leveraged. So take Middle America, really any city, right? I'll just give 2 examples. Transportation. As I say, the way I like to look at it is to not separate digitization from any physical infrastructure. They're really integrated. And we can come back to it later on. And with that integration, it really comes with a lot of opportunities across the board. So let me come back to transportation, for instance. For a city to provide transportation to its citizens, we not only provide utilities for people to get from point A to point B, and we also have to remember we're serving our citizens, right? So equity, for instance, accessibility, affordability, all have to be considered. And digitization really plays a key role, an important role in each of those aspects, right? So you take transportation, well, some people may have to take 3 public buses to get from where they live to where they work. I mean, that's not unusual. I live near New York. I hear that all the time. So how can we make these people's life a little easier, provide better forecast, provide better accessibility? And even when you build the physical infrastructure, you talk about accessibility, but when you talk about using it, you want to really provide forecast, make it as easy as possible. People don't have to look at schedules. How do I go from bus 1 to bus 2 to bus 3? So this is just one example. I have personally thought about quite a bit, actually, because I live near New York, in New York. Let me take a second example, buildings, right? Building, we know, has a lot of, use a lot of energy. But I think buildings also, it's a source of energy. I don't think we have spent enough thinking about how do we leverage untapped demand and put what we don't use, again, by better forecasting, and put what we don't use back on the grid. So here we keep talking about shutting down coal power plants, or not just in the United States, many places, and rightly so. We want to move from fossil fuel and power generation to renewable energy. But it may or may not need to be a not one-to-one replacement. But when we talk about forecasting future capacity, I think it will behoove us to think about what can we tap into in existing capacity, right? Including IBM, we run buildings, we have redundancy, we have, peak demand. We try to operate within this big envelope so we're all comfortable. never any interruption, never any, power outages. But I think technology is really enabling us to do a much finer prediction so that we will be able to utilize what we need and then put back what we don't. And again, as I said, that should reduce the need from building new plants, building new capacities, but instead leverage what we already have.
And Mark, I think this puts us in a good place to transition back to you. I think most of the discussions we heard whilst you were gone is that we not only have opportunity to innovate in energy supply, but the demand side of the equation gets quite interesting. For us as a region, can you just talk to us a little bit more about that ecosystem that you were saying before?
Yeah, and what I was saying was, when you really look broadly, whether it's in traditional industry or the emerging technologies or the academic research currently underway, we have a pretty robust, all-inclusive ecosystem. And so we think that's a value add in how we market. And obviously, with every new company that is interested in Pittsburgh, they're all inventing kind of new technologies and creating a whole different frontier for us. And so we want to make sure that they have the right concierge support so that they know that they belong here, kind of no matter where they fit. And I think over the next decade, you'll see the region really not just transition, but become more dynamic because all the experimentation on the mobility side, on green building, on carbon capture, on industrial sustainability, all of that's going to really take off here.
So we know that kind of the missing part of the discussion is investments, right? We want all of you to come here and the investments need to flow into it. I know that we're kind of running out of time. So what do we essentially do? What's the roadmap that you all need to essentially get all of these innovation, the cooperation with utilities, et cetera, to happen here? Mark, maybe we'll start with you and then we can move up to Snehal and circle back to Edan.
Yeah, I think what has been positive, you've seen pretty substantial venture announcements over the last year. Obviously, with the federal government stepping up its investment and really calling out R&D as a key driver of what the future entails, you're going to see just a lot of new company creation. And I think it will challenge traditional companies and regions to think, how do you partner, collaborate, ideate, so that we can actually experiment to get to the future. And we've done pretty well as a region because you have autonomous vehicles, you have a lot of just deep technologies that are already underway. More of that is really what our future economy looks like.
And Snehal, let's put you on the spot a little bit for that as well too. If we're going to continue investing in water too, what are kind of the estimates of the financial and social benefits that we can see from the community side as well too? Why should we, put our tax dollars into these types of increasing services?
Yeah, look, I mean, maybe to touch on what Mark said too, and then I'll come to that. One of the things that I think from an innovation perspective is an opportunity for the region is that these are about value chains, right? These are about complicated value chains. And I think what I've seen across my career in different communities is that too often things get done in pockets. And those pockets don't actually really solve the problem. They're a piece of the problem, but there's an opportunity here in the region to link up critical supply chains and then innovate across that. I mean, Edan's comment about digitization is everywhere is true, and so is water. So we are looking for being able to plug into those value chains on where and how do we innovate around our piece of the pie, but it's about the whole system. So that's I think one area that we could be better at here as we're talking about a plan for Middle America, because it's not happening in other places, which is a differentiator if it could happen. Pick a few industries and then bring that value chain together, because then it can actually show and not only what can be done, how it can be done, but then get the value for being the first mover to do it. Getting back to the value, I think there's a resource that we'd like to make sure that everybody out there knows is that recently the Value of Water Coalition released their annual report and actually presented it to the EPA, and I had an opportunity to sit in on that. But with the new infrastructure bill of that 2.5, 1.8, 800, whatever the number ends up being, trillion or billion, there's about $100 billion of that's actually earmarked to go into the water infrastructure piece. Now that is being done on the basis of being able to not only refurbish our infrastructure, but it is about a jobs program, right? It is about being able to create jobs that are meaningful. But if nothing else, it's to sustain the jobs that are there. A lack of water infrastructure will actually reduce the ability for companies to exist in some of the environments they're in, and therefore they will no longer be there. And they'll make a choice. They'll either move out of the region or move out of the country. I mean, those are the very basic choices. But a couple of data points that are worth looking at. I would highly encourage folks to find that. We'll be able to get that report over to CB, and it can be distributed. But it was really instrumental in understanding that, you know, from the EPA estimates that probably 6 to 10 million homes will have to be changing their lead service. Now, you could look at that and say, well, that's what we're doing here in Pittsburgh. But if you do that, that's approximately $22,000 in healthcare costs avoidance. What would that $22,000 do in terms of being able to be redirected into the environment, into the system, and to be able to be more productive? And then again, you know, EPA Administrator Reagan talked about that $111 billion that he thinks would go into water. We think that actually they actually said that closing the infrastructure gap actually turns into around 800,000 new jobs. Now, this is nationally, and that is just on that basis of what we know today, not even changing the new value chains when it comes to industrial. This is just the municipal sector. And that, I think, they equated to roughly $2,000 per household. So those extra dollars, when we talk about tax cuts and all that, we fix problems, we put money back in people's pockets because they're not paying it for the wrong things. And we think there's an opportunity there. But look, investing in water infrastructure and infrastructure in general is actually done. I thought that was very well said at the beginning of the conversation.
Fantastic. Idon, I think that, you know, considering that you're from a constantly evolving, the new industry, if you will, that sounds very cool and snazzy to us. I think there's a lot of discussion, perhaps because of the CMU and Pitt influence in Pittsburgh, around concepts of AI and cloud computing in cities, etc. Can you just talk to us a little bit too about that value of digitization and why we need to be thinking about this more as we're doing not only infrastructure, but built environment projects that you talked about before?
Sure. Maybe I could just look at this. I think Mark made a lot of good points. In answering the question, maybe I can look at 3 key points. I want to go back to what Mark said earlier about the partnership issue, you know, private-public academia partnership. And the second point, coming to your question about digitization and all that, it's the recognition, I think everybody knows about it, is to make sure our workforce continue to be educated, retrained, and re-educated. We have tremendous quality of people in Middle America, across this country, quite honestly. So we want to keep up with that. And the third thing, my view, is to not be thinking about what a particular region used to do, or what we're good at, what is different, but instead be forward-looking. If you have the right workforce, we committed to train the workforce, I think we can adapt. So those would be where I will start from. Now, you know, and by the way, this training and education is really not abstract, and it doesn't need to be highfalutin, like, oh, you have to go to, by the way, Pittsburgh happens to be one of the best schools, CMU. But, you know, people go to different kind of schools, different places, P-Tech programs, something IBM has invested largely. You know, we can train people with technical skills, right? Continually from high school to college, but prepare them to get into workforce quickly and readily, and have this continual learning mindset. What do I mean by not to limit to what we used to do? Proper and also tied to the partnership is, you think about the 2020 Energy Act, right? That particular act empowered DOE to invest, to do demonstration projects within the next 5 years, which is very near term, right? In 5 significant energy areas. And I believe Middle America, like any place else, should be able to compete. You're not constrained by natural resources or anything, whether it's advanced nuclear, what's long-term energy storage, carbon capture, enhanced geothermal. It doesn't really need to require a unique geographic differentiation, right? If you have the schools, you have the technology, and digitization provides that linkage, you can do a lot of good work from Pittsburgh that's serving the rest of the country in these 5 areas that I just mentioned. But this is just one small part, right? So I think we should leverage that. And while on the one hand differentiating the place, but also to not let that be a constraint. Leverage what is digitally available to us and put your talent out there, put your capabilities out there.
Fantastic. Well, I know CB, we're just at the end of our time. So thank you so much, panelists, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. So we turn it back to you, CB.
Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. And we could have continued for much longer, but we know that people's attention spans on Zoom are limited. So we've heard from these two terrific panels, one on the intersection of business and policy and academia, and the other one on competitiveness via infrastructure investment. Where do we go from here? So we have two great closers.
Hold on a minute. Okay, come on. She's not
Grant
ready.
Elvin, our Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Pittsburgh, and Steve Hersenberg of Keystone Research. And they're gonna, connect the dots for us so that something good actually happens from this meeting. Take it away.
Thanks, CB. I appreciate it. And thank you to all the panelists. And thank you, Catherine and Katrina, for being terrific facilitators and moderators of the conversation. And thank everyone for kind of sticking with us here. So just to kind of bring us home, Steve, you're going to provide like the color commentary, right? Like this is the post-game analysis, if you will. But to maybe lead off, if you can just share with folks, and you put a couple of important links in the chat. Could you talk a little bit about the Reimagine Appalachia campaign and what you guys have pulled together? Been critical partners of us with the Marshall Plan for Middle America, but maybe share a little bit about RIA. And you get to unmute.
Yeah. So yeah, the Reimagine Appalachia campaign and the Marshall Plan, and actually the climate portions of the Biden administration's American Jobs Plan are variants of what scientists call simultaneous discovery. So at least a couple of years ago, as you know, Grant, you and the founders of the Reimagine Appalachia campaign, including my organization, began to sense that the imperative for aggressive federal action on climate was an opportunity for our region.
No, you don't drink that.
We had a series of assumptions that led us to that conclusion. We knew that federal climate action was coming. We didn't know whether in 1 year or 5 years, but it was coming. We knew that the framing and the catchphrases of national climate advocacy, such as Green New Deal, came across in our region like a lead balloon. We knew that our region consisted of places of persistent poverty, and as we heard from the mayor, places that thrived in the New Deal, but have experienced 4 decades of downward mobility since steel and other manufacturing began to decline in the late 70s. And we knew that because of our economic history, working people and labor unions viewed environmental policies, and in particular climate action, with deep suspicion. So we knew we had to craft a climate action blueprint that led with jobs, 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 one that unions and working people could embrace. We did that in a particular process, designed to increase buy-in and build ownership in the region. And you guys had your process with the Marshall Plan, but that's the basics of how our campaign began. The essence of our agenda, very quickly, is one piece of it is invest in a sustainable 21st century economy. That's a little bit like some of what Jeff Sachs talked about, which is, if you go through the whole carbon footprint, transportation, the business sector, obviously the energy sector, manufacturing, if you business and residential energy consumption, the grid, and then another portion of our plan, but also the Biden plan is absorbing carbon. So whether it's planting more trees or restoring wetlands or changing farming practices to those that absorb more carbon. So the bottom line is that when you go through all that aggressive investment that we have to do now, get to net zero, that you're going to create a lot of jobs. And so the second part of our plank was, let's make sure that those are good jobs. Let's have policies that make them union jobs, opportunities for a diverse next generation, equivalent opportunities for co-workers. And then the third part of our plan is, a lot of the economy is not carbon or green. And so that part of the economy also needs to be equitable. So we do need things like a higher minimum wage, union rights for all, investment in local wealth creation economy-wide. But I apologize for getting a bit weedy, but the bottom line is that those three basic buckets overlap very strongly. The Marshall Plan overlap immensely in terms of the climate pieces of that, the Biden plan. So that's what our campaign is. And as you know, Grant, the next order of business is, it's one thing to flesh out the vision. It's absolutely important to the questions that people are raising about what are you actually going to do? How do you make this real? Can you really create a good new job for coal workers? Brian, I loved his answer to that. The orphan wells, the reclaiming acid mine lands, because that's jobs right where the jobs have been lost. So that's the basic outline of our campaign.
Just to reflect a little bit on some of the great content that we heard from the panels, where do you see some of the challenges? To use a Pittsburgh analogy, where are the potholes in the road in terms of what could lie ahead for this agenda?
Well, I mean, in the end, it's political, right? I mean, so we had a bit more time. I might share a chart someone sent me yesterday, which was a chart of funding to the Appalachian Regional Commission from kind of the late 60s when it was put in place to now. And what it showed is that I think the number is 1.6 billion. So the first half of the 70s, you had 1.6 billion a year. Then starting in 76, you had a downward trajectory to the last decade or more, well under $100 million a year. My rough guesstimate on the, if we'd continued investing at the level of the early 70s, we'd have invested $46 billion more in Appalachia. So what that tells you is just because, and again, that decline happened exactly the wrong time. Yep. That happened when manufacturing job loss was beginning. We've layered on top of that a lot of extractive job loss, particularly in coal country. And so what that tells you is just because the objective reality is that you need massive government investment in repositioning the economy, business, labor, the community, government, all getting together and to reinvent themselves and continue what had been at that point in 1976, we'd had 30 plus years of shared prosperity. But that's not what we got. We got the opposite. So that's the fundamental thing. I mean, this conversation today has been all about, we can do this. And I absolutely agree. And we don't have time to flesh out in detail all the how, but the how is not the problem. This group and the groups we're all networked with, we can answer the how with a little bit of Rooseveltian, throw stuff against the wall and see what it works. We can, but the question is, will we? Mm-hmm. That's the issue. So it's a political challenge that our campaign, allied with the mayors and the Marshall Plan, and anybody who's listening, if you're willing to go to our website and tell us you want to get on board and what you're going to do, it's a team effort to get done what we need to get done.
That's terrific. So that it's not a how, it's a question of conjuring up the political will to make things happen.
Exactly right.
I totally concur with that. So, with those remarks, CB, I'm going to turn it back to you to keep us right on the dot here. Want to thank just from the city of Pittsburgh standpoint, thank all of our partners and participants. And CB, thank you for corralling us all together. This has been absolutely terrific content. And I'll turn it over to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Grant. And thank you, Steve, for your wisdom and your informative comments. I think the last point that was made in terms of the political will and what will we, that's a very, very vital question. That's not something that we can answer. We can only show by doing it that, that we will, I hope. That's the direction we are headed in. But this is only the beginning, I would think, or an ongoing journey in terms of conversations. I would like to treat today's event as a conversation, of which there can be many, because there are so many other issues in this context in terms of kind of, where does the capital coming from? I mean, who are the providers of capital? Who are the users of capital? There can be different, there could be one meeting just on the circular economy. So maybe we'll convert this into something like, a lunch and learn series where, kind of every couple of months we convene a gathering of folks who want to debate and discuss some of these issues and keep the momentum going in terms of implementation. So we had over 100 folks registered for this meeting, which in this date and time is I would say rather impressive. So I would like to thank everybody who participated. Most importantly, my technological hero, Ash Brady, without whom none of this would have happened, who's handling everything behind the scenes. And of course, Grant Irwin, who has been a stalwart as far, from the city's side in helping us push these kinds of important things forward. And all the panelists and all the moderators and everyone else who came and participated in the meeting. We did record the meeting, and we will produce something in terms of a highlight summary that we can make available to all those who registered, and as well put some of that on social media. So with that, I thank you. Please support the center so that we are able to keep our lights on. That's not a given, I can assure you that. Please, if I don't know you personally and you were here today, please drop me a note, cb@pitt.edu. Would love to get to know everyone a little bit better. Mark, thank you for joining. Mark Kinsella, PPG, a strong supporter of ours, and everybody else who was here that I wasn't able to say hello to, and I'm seeing the names in front of all the folks that I know. Thank you for coming. And that's it. We are adjourned. Terry, we'll talk later.